Hey guys, in this video I'll be showing you how to add imagery, work in layers and add shapes into your InDesign document. So right now I've got my setup, I've got some headings, I've got some body text, but it's looking a bit plain. I need to add some excitement to my page. Before I start adding images, what I need to do is I need to start working in layers. At this point in my layers panel, and if this isn't here, you can go to window and go to layers. I've only got one layer, and that's the layer where my type is on. So I'm going to rename layer 1 to be text or type, whatever you prefer to call it. And I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to name this imagery. And I'm going to actually drag imagery under text. Because in an InDesign document, we're trying to emphasize the written content on the page. We always want that to be at the forefront, at the furthest layer in front. So I'm going to put text at the top, imagery underneath. You can then add subsequent layers, whether you're adding particular features like shapes, which I might actually add. I'm going to add a third layer. I'm going to call this shapes/objects. And then I'm going to drag that underneath imagery. So what I've got here is a clear hierarchy. I've got text, I've got imagery, I've got shapes and objects. I'm going to lock the text layer so I can't adjust it. And the shapes and objects layer I'm going to lock, and I'm going to work specifically on the imagery layer. So I'm going to close the layers panel, and now I'm going to start adding my imagery. There are a couple ways you can go about adding imagery and altering it, and I'm going to show you that now. To add imagery on your page, what you need to do is you need to go to File, and you need to go to Place, or you can use the shortcut Control-D, which I would recommend getting familiar with just because it makes the process a bit easier. So you go to Control-D or Place, and you find where you want to place some imagery. So let's say I want to place this particular artwork that a student of mine has done. I'm going to select it, and it can be a PDF and it can be a JPEG, whatever file type it is. It doesn't particularly matter. It can also be an Illustrator file if you're working with an Illustrator file. I'm going to hit Open, and what you could do is you could just click once and it places the image at the actual size, which you could do if you want, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to press Control-Z. I'm going to resize the imagery to take up about that much space on the page. So it's taking up everything within the margins essentially, and there's a bit of space at the bottom. So now that I've placed that image, we can see that there's lots of little scratchy marks that I want to get rid of, as well as a student name. So I'm gonna click the image just once, and this red bounding box that popped up around the side, I'm gonna adjust that like so. So you can then crop your image to however you like. So I'm gonna crop it to about that size. And you can place that wherever you want. Mine's going to be roughly 2 columns wide. And now I have an image there placed on my page. And it looks pretty nice. It's got a bit of breathing room between the text and the heading. You could increase that if you wanted to, but we still got all this kind of dead space here on the right. So that's one way you can go about placing your image and adjusting it. We can see here that there's lots of space around the image that can be used, and that this image is of good quality, so I could make it larger. And I'm going to show you guys how to place it within a particular area. So I'm going to delete that image now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now draw, using the shape tool, a rectangle. And I'm going to draw this rectangle to be 3 columns wide with a pretty even space between the top heading and the text. So it's kind of placed centered on the page. I'm going to make sure that this shape has no outline. So it's going to have no outline and no fill, which I've adjusted up here. So that controls the fill, that controls the outline. So right now this is just a blank space, and it's permanently there on the page, and we can see it here, but if I go to my print preview, it disappears. I'm going to click this shape I've created, and I'm going to press Control-D, or you can go to File and Place, and I'm going to place the same image within it. I'm going to press Open. So what it's done now is that it's placed the image in that bounding box. So it has placed it in there for me, so I don't actually have to crop it. What I want to do is I want to actually expand this image to be larger, so it focuses mainly on this interesting pattern that is created in the middle. What I'm going to do, instead of actually clicking the image that then creates this bounding box in red around the side, I'm going to click this central circle that appears in the middle. What that controls is the actual image inside. So now you can move and shift the image without moving the bounding box by using that knob. I'm going to also adjust the image using that as well, and we can see that it's creating this preview as I expand it out, and I can readjust this image using the knob, and again it's not adjusting the actual bounding box on the outside. So now I've placed that image within that square, and it's looking a little bit cooler. It's using up more of the page. It's more interesting to look at. Let's say you wanted to place an image that would go all the way to the edge of the page. I'm going to draw another rectangle using the rectangle tool here. I'm going to draw a rectangle that starts from the middle and extends all the way out to the bleed, so that red line. And I'm going to place an image in there as well. So file and place. And I'm going to select another student's work that I've got. So I'm going to select this one. And now it's placed that within that space as well. I'm then going to use the knob again to rotate the image within that space. So it's not adjusting the bounding box. And then I'm going to resize it so it goes all the way to the edge, like so. Excellent. So now this image takes up more of the page. It's going all the way to the middle central line, and it's going all the way to the edge. And the reason why we've extended it all the way to this bleed is that when and if you print this document, it usually prints with a white border, just because that's how printers work. But by having an image all the way to the bleed means it won't have that white border. And that's a really, really good way of working. So there's a couple of different ways to set up your page. You can have a more centered image where there's a nice use of the margin, or you can kind of ignore the margin and use up a lot more of your space. Again, you don't need to use just squares. Let's say on my front cover here, I decide to use a circle. So instead of the rectangle tool, I use the ellipse tool. So from roughly the center of my page, I'm going to draw a nice big circle like so. Might adjust that a little bit. Get rid of the stroke, and I could file and place. And let's say I'm going to pop this image in there. We can see that it's placed in there, and because it's quite a large image, it's expanded all the way out. So I can adjust it like so. And I can place that image in the circle template that I've created. So that's how you can place photographs or designs that you've created into custom shapes rather than trying to format it just to squares and rectangles. So it can be really interesting. You can also use the pen tool to do this. So let's say you've got the pen tool here on the left side, use the pen tool. Let's say you've drawn more of an engaging shape like so. Just something to frame your page with. You get rid of the stroke again, and you go to file and place. And in there, you can place your image as well. And we can see how we've now placed a design within that space, and it's conformed to that space, and it's left over all this other space that we can then put in our text and type. So you can create those custom shapes using the pen tool as well. So it's a really interesting way to create like little shards of imagery that you can then apply text or type next to as well. Let's say we are happy with our front cover, but we want a darker backdrop. We don't want white. I'd go back to my layers panel. I'd lock the imagery layer and go to your shapes and objects. And just using a rectangle, I'm going to draw a rectangle that goes to the bleed line in this document. And I'm going to make the fill black. And that will then mean it has a nice black backdrop and then my imagery in the middle, and then I could then potentially add headings and subheadings on the top and bottom. So that's when the shapes and objects panel can be really helpful, because you can then place little features. Let's say I want to create a nice gray to go behind my text here, or maybe behind my heading, so it's a little more emphasized. So I'll get rid of the stroke and I'll make it black. But then I can adjust the opacity here where I've selected this, and I can adjust this to be about 40%. So now my heading has a bit of a gray box, and it's behind my imagery and my text. So it's behind all that important stuff. It's more of a secondary kind of feature. And this can be a really great way to start framing your page, to start making adjustments. Again, just because you've locked in using your body text or your character style, you can always go back and adjust your text to be a different color. If you wanted to make it white, you could do that as well and make it a bit more custom. So that's how you go about adding shapes and imagery into your InDesign document. After watching these 3 videos, I hope you've kind of got a good inkling of how you can go about setting up your interesting publication design. Good luck, guys.